Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. This matters more than it seems. Lovecraft cared deeply about time, distance, and perspective. He believed meaning changed depending on where and when a mind encountered it. The common claim is simple. Lovecraft feared the cosmos. That idea has survived because it is convenient. Fear is easy to explain. Addiction is not. Tonight, we examine a different possibility. Lovecraft did not merely describe cosmic horror. He returned to it compulsively, refined it obsessively, and built his entire philosophy around its implications. Consider the period between 1917 and 1937. Astronomy expanded humanity's sense of scale. Biology erased comforting boundaries between species. Philosophy abandoned moral certainty. Lovecraft absorbed all of this. He did not recoil. He organized it into stories that behave like arguments. We must pause here. This is not a biography, and it is not a celebration. It is an investigation into fixation, on ancient time, on forbidden systems, on knowledge that dissolves the thinker. The texts will guide us, but they will not protect us. What follows is a careful study of patterns, not monsters. By listening, you are already participating in the experiment. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890, at the precise moment when older cosmologies were losing authority and nothing stable had replaced them. This timing matters. His childhood unfolded under the long shadow of Victorian certainty, but his adulthood coincided with its collapse. By the time he began publishing seriously in the late 1910s, astronomy had displaced humanity from the center of the universe, and Darwinian biology had dissolved clear boundaries between species. These developments did not simply inform Lovecraft's fiction, they structured his worldview. He understood himself as living after a revelation that could not be undone. Lovecraft's personal circumstances intensified this historical pressure. The early institutionalization of his father in 1893, followed by his mother's mental decline and death in 1921, created a lifelong association between knowledge and loss. Stability vanished early. He retreated into antiquarian study, mastering archaic language, classical literature, and amateur astronomy before adolescence. This retreat was not escapism in the usual sense. It was an attempt to locate permanence in systems older than modern life. According to his letters, the ancient felt reliable precisely because it was indifferent. Consider the intellectual climate of the United States between 1900 and 1930. Scientific optimism coexisted with deep cultural anxiety. Einstein's theories destabilized common sense. Geological time expanded beyond human intuition. World War I demonstrated the fragility of progress narratives. Lovecraft absorbed these shifts without resistance. He accepted their conclusions fully, then asked a harder question. How should literature respond when the universe no longer centers the human observer? His answer was not realism or satire. It was cosmic horror as a philosophical mode. We must pause here. Lovecraft did not write to frighten in the conventional sense. His letters repeatedly dismiss shock, gore, and suspense as superficial tools. Instead, he aimed to induce what he called cosmic emotion, a response closer to awe than terror. This reveals something profound. His intent was analytical. The stories test what happens to the human mind when it encounters facts that strip meaning rather than supply it. Horror becomes a method, not an end. Between 1917 and 1935, Lovecraft refined this method across essays, poems, and fiction. His non-fiction piece, Supernatural Horror in Literature, makes the project explicit. He frames weird fiction as a response to modernity's metaphysical void. Unlike Gothic predecessors who feared divine punishment or moral decay, Lovecraft focused on scale, time, and insignificance. The threat is not evil, it is irrelevance. This distinction separates his work from earlier traditions and explains its lasting unease. Lovecraft's intent was also shaped by his aesthetic conservatism. He despised industrial modernity, urban crowds, and mass culture, yet he did not imagine a return to pre-modern belief. That option, he knew, was closed. His fiction stages this tension repeatedly. Ancient truths resurface, but they offer no comfort. They confirm humanity's late arrival and inevitable disappearance. Not salvation, but clarification. The past speaks, and what it says is final. This historical positioning sets the foundation for everything that follows. Lovecraft's cosmic horror emerges from a precise convergence of scientific discovery, personal loss, and intellectual rigor. Understanding this context clarifies why his work obsesses over origins, antiquity, and hidden continuities. It also prepares us to examine the deeper traditions he drew from, which extend far beyond his own century and into older philosophical anxieties. Lovecraft did not invent the terror of cosmic indifference. He refined it from older materials. Beneath his mythos lies a long tradition of philosophical unease, where the human mind strains against systems too large, too alien, or too ancient to comprehend. To read Lovecraft is to enter a conversation already in progress, one that includes Gnostic theologians, Enlightenment skeptics, Romantic poets, and 19th century materialists. His contribution was not origin, but synthesis. Consider three primary antecedents: the ancient Gnostics, the Gothic Romantics, and the decadent symbolists. The Gnostics imagined a universe ruled not by a benevolent god, but by a blind demiurge, a creator without understanding. Lovecraft adopts this mood. Azathoth, the blind idiot god at the center of chaos, is a philosophical echo of this earlier fear. Gothic romantics such as Poe and Coleridge contributed the atmosphere of decaying knowledge and fatal beauty. Lovecraft admired Poe obsessively, calling him his literary god. Finally, the decadents, writers like Baudelaire and Huysmans, introduced the idea that truth might itself be poisonous, a theme Lovecraft would extend into madness. We must also account for 19th century science. The idea of deep time, introduced by geologists like James Hutton and later amplified by Darwin, rewrote the human story. Suddenly, civilization occupied only the final sliver of an incomprehensible timeline. Lovecraft embraced this with disturbing ease. In the shadow. Out of time, the protagonist's mind is hurled backward millions of years and finds itself at home. Evolutionary theory for Lovecraft wasn't about progress. It was about instability, flux, and the loss of form. His stories invert the optimism of the Enlightenment. Knowledge does not liberate, it disorients. Nietzsche's shadow also looms over the mythos. Though Lovecraft rarely cited him directly, the shared logic is unmistakable. Both confronted the consequences of a godless universe. Both saw that traditional morality collapses under scientific scrutiny. But where Nietzsche urged humanity to create its own values, Lovecraft recoiled. His fiction does not rebuild. It dwells in the aftermath. This reveals a key distinction. Lovecraft's was not a philosophy of revolt, but of recognition. He accepted cosmic meaninglessness not with despair, but with fascination. Another overlooked influence is theosophy. Popular in the early 20th century, theosophy blended occult mysticism with pseudoscientific speculation. It introduced ideas like ancient alien races, hidden dimensions, and pre-human civilizations. Lovecraft denied belief in the supernatural, but he borrowed its imagery. In stories like At the Mountains of Madness, ancient non-human entities govern vast spans of time and knowledge. The style is scientific, but the structure is mythic. This fusion defines Lovecraft's unique effect, rationality serving irrational ends. We must pause here. Lovecraft's deepest philosophical commitment was to detachment. He believed human values were local illusions. His fiction stages this idea repeatedly. Protagonists begin in confidence, discover the vastness beyond, and lose their place within it. But this narrative is not one of punishment. It is a revelation. Terrible, yes, but also beautiful in its finality. Lovecraft was not moralizing. He was cataloging a shift in metaphysical temperature. These cultural and philosophical antecedents explain why Lovecraft's work resists conventional horror tropes. There are no demons in the mythos, only organisms and forces. There are no clear moral lessons, only patterns too large to decode. Inheritance becomes infection. His influences reappear distorted, their meanings expanded. Gothic despair becomes cosmic recursion. Romantic awe becomes existential exposure. Mysticism becomes epistemic collapse. This prepares us to examine the next layer of Lovecraft's project, the language he used to transmit these ideas. For if the philosophical structure was inherited, the symbolic system was invented, and that system demands close study. Lovecraft's horror does not emerge from direct description. It unfolds through suggestion, through names half pronounced, runes half deciphered, texts half read. Language in his stories is not a transparent medium. It is a barrier, a filter, a trap. This linguistic opacity is not incidental. It is central to his aesthetic. To understand Lovecraft, we must treat his word choices not as decoration, but as devices of disorientation. Consider his invented names: Cthulhu, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep. These are not random syllables. Each name violates phonetic expectations. The placement of consonants feels alien, unpronounceable. Linguist S.T. Joshi notes that Lovecraft used consonant clusters and guttural sounds to resist familiar structures. Cthulhu is not meant to be said. It is meant to fail in the throat. This failure is symbolic. The creature cannot be truly named, and so the name itself becomes a linguistic artifact of its unknowability. Lovecraft once wrote that Cthulhu was intended to approximate a sound the human vocal apparatus could not produce. This fictional conceit reveals a deeper strategy. Language, in Lovecraft's hands, is thematic terrain. It mirrors the collapse of understanding. Words become unstable, reality porous. The Necronomicon is not merely a book. It is a ciphered object, resisting complete translation. The implication is subtle but devastating. Even if the truth is written down, we lack the tools to read it. Archaic diction reinforces this collapse. Lovecraft consistently favors terms like eldritch, cyclopean, antiquarian, squamous, rugose. These words are not just old, they are deliberately obscure. Their strangeness is functional. They signal a temporal remove, a tone of fossilized knowledge. More importantly, they summon a world where precision gives way to suggestion. What does squamous truly mean when applied to an alien god? It tells us less about the entity, more about the limits of human description. We must pause here. Lovecraft's symbolic vocabulary performs a double function. On one level, it alienates. On another, it tempts. Readers return not for clarity, but for repetition. The same terms reappear across stories: blasphemous tomes, sunken cities, mad dreams. These are not cliches. They are ritual forms. The repetition constructs a lexicon of dread, one that functions like myth. We do not fully understand it. We do not need to. Its power lies in association, not definition. Triadic listing becomes a stylistic tick. The book speaks of cycles, of alignments, of gateways. This structure mimics incantation. It builds rhythm and symbolic density. The items themselves are vague. Together, they imply order. This is key to Lovecraft's addiction, not to meaning, but to the appearance of meaning. His stories often end in fragmentation, but they gesture toward patterns that seem ancient and coherent. The reader becomes complicit, decoding, hypothesizing, assembling meaning where none is confirmed. The symbolic use of writing itself deepens this structure. Lovecraft's protagonists rarely encounter monsters directly. They read about them. Stories are constructed from letters, diaries, academic reports. The Dunwich Horror unfolds through Miskatonic transcripts. The Call of Cthulhu is pieced together from sculptural fragments and newspaper clippings. Narrative becomes archive. The horror lies not in what is said, but in how incomplete the record remains. This textual strategy models epistemic collapse. The more one reads, the less stable the world becomes. Language ceases to clarify and begins to dissolve the boundary between knowledge and madness. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft does not destroy language. He saturates it until it collapses under its own weight. Every word points beyond itself. Every sentence is haunted by what it cannot say. This leads us toward the final piece of Lovecraft's method, how his symbolic language feeds the illusion of mythic authenticity. Names, words, and glyphs are only the surface. Beneath them is the machinery of invented belief systems, rituals, chronologies, texts. These function not as lore, but as scaffolding. In the next section, we will examine how Lovecraft constructs myth, not to explain the unknown, but to make its presence felt. Lovecraft's stories often begin with fragments, a letter, a damaged manuscript, a whisper from an old man whose memory falters just as it reveals too much. These are not framing devices in the usual sense. They are part of a deeper strategy, the construction of narrative authenticity through the simulation of myth. Lovecraft does not ask readers to believe in the mythos as truth. He asks them to experience it as real enough to disturb, coherent enough to compel, and incomplete enough to provoke obsession. The cornerstone of this strategy is the pseudo-bibliography, the Necronomicon, the Pnakotic manuscripts, the Book of Ibon. These texts appear repeatedly, often in passing, always treated as genuine artifacts. Lovecraft even provided invented publication histories, authors, and translations. Abdul al-Hazred, the mad Arab who penned the Necronomicon, functions less as a character than as a mythic author, a vector through which forbidden knowledge leaks into modern consciousness. The point is not exposition, it is texture. The presence of these books suggests a world already haunted by its own scholarship. These fictional sources appear across multiple stories, creating a sense of internal consistency. The Dunwich Horror, the Call of Cthulhu, and the Whisperer in Darkness all reference the same university, Miskatonic, and the same grim archives. This intertextual scaffolding mimics religious canons or oral traditions. The stories refer to one another obliquely, not directly. What emerges is a feeling of deep continuity beneath surface chaos. Readers sense that more exists than is revealed. This is not world building in the fantasy tradition. It is myth construction through selective omission. We must pause here. Lovecraft's myth building thrives on incompletion. It is not a puzzle with missing pieces. It is a pattern too large to hold in one frame. He supplies fragments, contradictions, and unexplained connections. The result is interpretive momentum. Readers feel compelled to assemble a coherent whole, even as the text resists it. This is precisely what gives the mythos its longevity. It can be expanded without limit, because its boundaries were never defined. Geography plays a role in this effect. Lovecraft used real locations, Providence, Boston, the New England coast, but layered fictional sites atop them. Arkham, Innsmouth, and Kingsport feel plausible because they are embedded in authentic terrain. This technique roots the mythic in the mundane. The reader encounters something almost familiar, just off-center. The mythos operates like regional folklore, grounded in place, yet never fully locatable. It invites the question, if one town hides a secret cult, why not others? Lovecraft also deploys academic forms to deepen authenticity. His stories adopt the tone of field reports, ethnographic studies, or scientific abstracts. This is especially clear in At the Mountains of Madness, where the narrator is a geologist recounting a doomed Antarctic expedition. The detail is exhaustive: glacial formations, mineral composition, atmospheric data. This precision does not clarify the horror. It intensifies it. The intrusion of the impossible into such a rational structure suggests that knowledge itself is inadequate, or worse, complicit. This brings us to a final observation. Lovecraft's mythos is not coherent because it was planned. It is coherent because it was repeated. The symbols recur: books, cults, ruins, stars, but their meanings remain open. There is no canon, only accumulation. Each story adds density, not clarity. The mythos behaves like a living tradition, mutable, decentralized, and self-sustaining. This structure sets the stage for everything that follows. Now that we understand how Lovecraft crafted his stories to feel true, not in content, but in form, we are prepared to descend into the next layer. In Part 2, we move beyond the outer structure of myth and enter its core: the philosophical concepts, the entities, and the psychological functions that define the Lovecraftian cosmos. At the core of Lovecraft's fiction is not fear, but scale. Horror is not his final aim, it is a symptom. His stories revolve around three interlocking concepts: insignificance, entropy, and the unreliability of reality itself. These are not ideas imposed on the narrative after the fact. They are built into its structure, driving the characters toward collapse. Each concept dismantles a human presumption that we matter, that we endure, that we can trust what we perceive. Lovecraft's true subject is not monsters. It is the conditions under which meaning fails. Insignificance appears first, and most often. His protagonists are typically educated men, scholars, historians, scientists, equipped with rational tools. Yet again and again, those tools prove useless. In The Whisperer in Darkness, Albert Wilmarth begins confident in the boundaries of science. By the end, he questions whether his very thoughts are his own. The message is clear. Knowledge does not confer mastery. It exposes how little there is to master. The universe is not malevolent. It is indifferent. And this indifference is worse than hostility. It erases the human project altogether. This leads directly to entropy. Lovecraft's worlds are not progressing. They are rotting. Civilizations fall, languages degrade, bodies mutate. Time is not a line, but a downward slope, a slow disintegration. In The Nameless City, the ruins do not inspire wonder, they suffocate. The narrator writes, It was of this place that Abdul al-Hazred, the mad poet, dreamed on the night before he sang his unexplained couplet. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. The phrase is not a prophecy of resurrection. It is a meditation on stagnant immortality, a state beyond decay, where even death has lost its structure. We must pause here. Entropy, in Lovecraft's fiction, is not limited to matter. It invades memory, language, identity. Characters forget who they are, merge with other beings, or discover they have never been human at all. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, the protagonist first recoils from the town's genetic blasphemy, but by the end, he accepts it. Worse, he embraces it. I shall dwell with the others in the deep, he writes, and bring knowledge and wonder to the city that has sheltered me. The self has not endured. It has devolved willingly. This is not transformation. It is surrender. Dream reality collapse completes the triad. Lovecraft's work often blurs waking experience and unconscious revelation. The dream quest of unknown Kadath makes this structure explicit, but dream logic permeates his entire corpus. In The Call of Cthulhu, widespread nightmares precede the emergence of the Great Old One. The suggestion is that dreams are not subjective echoes, but shared apertures, psychic entry points to deeper truths. This reframes perception itself. If dreams reveal more than waking life, then consciousness is not a safeguard. It is a veil, easily pierced. This reframing leads to epistemic crisis. What can be known if perception is unstable? Lovecraft does not offer resolution. Instead, he dramatizes cognitive collapse. Characters often begin their accounts with a warning. I am not mad. What I write may seem unbelievable. These denials signal precisely the opposite. The speaker is already unraveling, and the reader is invited to trace the logic of disintegration. The horror is not in what is seen, but in what the mind does with it. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft's most disturbing insight is not that the universe is alien. It is that we are incapable of noticing just how alien it truly is, until it is too late. His stories do not climax with revelation. They end in recognition that the horror was always present, that the mind simply refused to see it. I have looked upon all that the universe has to hold of horror, writes the narrator of The Shadow Out of Time. And even the skies of spring and the flowers of summer must ever afterward be poison to me. The landscape has not changed, but perception has, and that is enough. This triad, insignificance, entropy, dream collapse, forms the philosophical skeleton of Lovecraftian horror. These are not just themes. They are conditions under which narrative, identity, and belief become unstable. In the next section, we will turn from these conceptual forces to the entities that embody them. Beings not evil, but utterly outside comprehension, and all the more dangerous for it. Lovecraft's entities do not resemble traditional demons or gods. They are not symbolic of human vice, nor do they serve as moral agents. Instead, they are structural anomalies, interruptions in the known order, indifferent to language, consciousness, or desire. Their function is not to punish or tempt, but to expose the instability of the systems humans rely upon. Lovecraft's cosmos is not populated by villains. It is populated by evidence of scale, of antiquity, of inhuman continuity. Cthulhu is often mistaken as the centerpiece of this pantheon. In fact, Cthulhu is only one node in a vast, fragmented ecology. Described as part octopus, part dragon, part human caricature, Cthulhu does not terrify through appearance, but through implication. Its emergence, From the sunken city of R'lyeh signals the return of an order that never really left. In the Call of Cthulhu, worshippers chant, Fenglui Mgulwanaf, Cthulhu R'lyeh Wagahnagel Ftagen, not as prophecy, but as reminder. The old ones are not dead. They are dormant. This is not myth. It is delayed inevitability. Azathoth sits at the symbolic center of Lovecraft's cosmos. It is not a character, but a principle, a blind idiot god, nuclear chaos, a symbol of creation without intent. No will, no reason, no order. Lovecraft writes, outside the ordered universe, there lurks Azathoth, seething, bubbling, mindless, and amorphous. This formulation strips away anthropocentric assumptions. Creation is not meaningful. It is mechanical, deaf, and absurd. The universe does not see us. It never did. Nyarlathotep is different. Active, communicative, and mutable, he appears in many guises across Lovecraft's stories. But unlike trickster gods of older mythologies, Nyarlathotep does not mock or test humans. He performs revelation. In the prose poem Nyarlathotep, he walks the earth, showing people visions so profound they lose their minds. He brings no armies, only truth. And where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished, the narrator writes. For the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmare. His danger lies in what he reveals, not in what he does. We must pause here. These entities are not monsters in the horror convention. They are ontological events. Their appearance signals not destruction, but disruption of time, thought, taxonomy. In the color out of space, the alien presence is not even embodied. It is a color, unplaceable in the visible spectrum, slowly leaching life and coherence from the landscape. No creature appears. The horror is in the failure of the environment to behave properly. The dreamlands introduce another layer. While less explicitly horrific, they operate under the same metaphysical logic. Beings like Hypnos, the Zoogs, or the Cats of Ulthar inhabit a dream-structured plane parallel to waking reality. But even here, the forces are not aligned with human comfort. In the dream quest of unknown Kadeth, Randolph Carter seeks a beautiful city glimpsed in dreams. When he finally finds it, he learns it is his own childhood home, something so precious it is denied to him forever. This is not redemption. It is denial with infinite echo. These beings, then, share certain traits: extreme age, inhuman logic, indifference to human values. They are not antagonists. They are evidence that the universe is not ours. Their true danger is not their power, but the perspective they force upon the observer. To encounter them is to be displaced, reframed, reclassified. Human knowledge becomes provincial in their presence. This leads us to an uncomfortable question. If these entities do not seek us out, why do we keep finding them? Why do Lovecraft's protagonists continue their investigations, their rituals, their readings? The answer lies in a deeper psychological mechanism, an attraction not to horror, but to collapse. In the next section, we will examine how these encounters affect the human mind, not simply in terms of fear, but in terms of identity dissolution, epistemic ruin, and willing submission to cosmic truth. In Lovecraft's universe, madness is not the breaking of the mind. It is the final alignment between human perception and cosmic reality. The characters who go mad are not weak, deluded, or cursed. They are accurate. Madness in Lovecraft is a byproduct of contact, a side effect of clarity. It is what happens when the mind glimpses truths it was never designed to process and cannot ever forget. Consider the shadow out of time. The protagonist, Professor Nathaniel Peaslee, experiences a 5-year fugue state, later revealed to be a mind exchange with the great race of Yith. The horror is not the event, it is the aftermath. He uncovers geological evidence confirming his dreams, journals, written in his own hand but in an alien tongue. His identity fractures under the pressure of confirmation. As he says, "It is a mistake to fancy that horror is associated inextricably with darkness, silence, and solitude. Horror arrives instead with certainty. Madness becomes the moment the self can no longer maintain coherence under what it now knows." This model repeats across the mythos. In Dagon, the narrator escapes an ancient creature from the ocean's depths, only to live in obsessive anticipation of its return. "I hear it at night, dragging its foulness through the streets," he writes. His fear is not of death, but of absorption, the erasure of human distinction. In The Call of Cthulhu, Inspector Legrasse, artist Henry Anthony Wilcox, and narrator Francis Wayland Thurston all spiral into fragmentation after partial contact with the same mythic structure. The more they compare notes, the more they realize that their experiences, dreams, statues, cults, are parts of a larger pattern. Knowledge does not resolve anxiety, it generates it. We must pause here. The madness function in Lovecraft does not signal failure, it signals completion. The process begins with curiosity, proceeds through discovery, and ends in collapse. This arc is not accidental. It mirrors the structure of religious initiation, but inverted. Instead of salvation through deeper truths, Lovecraft offers annihilation through exposure. His characters do not fall into madness, they arrive at it. This structure implies that human minds are designed to exclude reality, not to perceive it. Madness occurs when that barrier is breached. In The Dreams in the Witch House, Walter Gilman's mathematical explorations open spatial dimensions his body cannot survive. In The Thing on the Doorstep, Edward Darby's identity is invaded, overwritten, and evacuated. These are not moral tales. They are metaphysical case studies. The mind, like any organ, has limits. Lovecraft's stories exist to test them. Importantly, the function of madness is not merely narrative. It is structural. Madness in these texts is the form through which forbidden knowledge is transmitted to the reader. Narrators often preface their accounts with disclaimers. "You may not believe this. I cannot prove what I saw." These phrases invite skepticism while supplying evidence. The story becomes a trap. As the reader assembles the pattern, they mirror the character's descent. Understanding becomes contamination. Lovecraft's innovation, then, was to make madness logical. He removed the supernatural explanation, replacing it with an empirical one. These are not ghosts or hallucinations. These are revelations. The mind does not reject them because they are false. It rejects them because they are true in a way incompatible with selfhood. This inversion is central to the mythos. Sanity is provincial. Madness is cosmically aligned. In the next section, we examine the final stage of this descent. Beyond perception, beyond collapse, lies a different danger: the written word. Books, symbols, chants. These do not merely describe forbidden knowledge. They contain it, and once read, they cannot be unread. We now turn to the deepest hazard in Lovecraft's world: epistemic collapse through forbidden knowledge. In Lovecraft's fiction, knowledge is not enlightenment, it is exposure. What destroys his characters is not what they see, but what they understand too late. Forbidden knowledge functions not as a tool, but as a contaminant. It does not expand perception. It reconfigures it, leaving the recipient unable to return to ordinary thought. Once the door is opened, it cannot be closed. Once the pattern is glimpsed, it cannot be unseen. Consider the Necronomicon, the most infamous artifact in Lovecraft's mythos. It is not dangerous because it casts spells or summons demons. Its threat lies in what it reveals. Every mention of it is accompanied by academic qualifiers, certain passages, obscure translations, fragmentary accounts. Readers never access the full text, yet even partial exposure unravels its readers. In the Dunwich Horror, Dr. Armitage consults the Necronomicon not to banish evil, but to understand its genealogy. The result is not clarity, but dread. The more he knows, the more tenuous reality becomes. This reveals something profound. Lovecraft treats knowledge not as a ladder, but as a trapdoor. Epistemic collapse begins with a single deviation, a symbol, a phrase, an artifact, and accelerates. In The Haunter of the Dark, Robert Blake encounters a cult, a church, and a jewel said to attract an ancient force. His journal entries become increasingly unstable. By the end, the reader does not know whether Blake died of fright or contact. What matters is the shift. The world changed because of what he allowed himself to read. We must pause here. Epistemic collapse is not localized. It spreads. Lovecraft often uses narrative nesting, accounts within diaries, clippings within letters, studies within dreams. Each layer seems to confirm the last, but no layer provides certainty. This recursive structure destabilizes the reader. The closer one gets to the core, the more ambiguous the truth becomes. The Call of Cthulhu is assembled from second-hand documents. The case of Charles Dexter Ward is reconstructed from letters and records. Knowledge builds not toward truth, but toward entropic overload. Too many data points, not enough resolution. Dreams intensify this effect. In stories like The Dreams in the Witch House and The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, dream encounters are not symbolic. They are adjacent realities where hidden knowledge flows more freely. This positions dreams as both refuge and threat. They offer access, but at the cost of stability. Walter Gilman's dreams teach him forbidden geometry. Randolph Carter's journey shows him the gods behind the veil. Both lose something in return: coherence, identity, place. The most chilling aspect of forbidden knowledge in Lovecraft's fiction is its absence of purpose. There is no ultimate revelation, no secret that redeems the journey. The knowledge does not lead to power. It leads to declassification. The seeker learns that human consciousness is neither privileged nor protected. In The Shadow Out of Time, Professor Peaslee discovers his mind once belonged to another species, swapped across time for archival purposes. His scholarship confirms this, and in doing so, strips him of uniqueness. This inversion, where knowledge dissolves the self, violates the classical model of the hero's journey. There is no triumph, no return, only survival, and even that is uncertain. Lovecraft's narrators often end their accounts with resignation, not resistance. "Do not think me insane," they write, "but I had to write it down." The act of telling is itself a contamination event. The reader becomes the next link. We now stand at the precipice of Lovecraft's method. Myth, language, entities, and human perception all serve a deeper function: to carry fragments of a system that cannot be fully grasped. Forbidden knowledge is not a subject. It is a mechanism designed to break narrative form and epistemic confidence. In Part 3, we will examine how these ideas are not simply repeated across stories, but evolve through early texts, major case studies, and collaborative expansions into a self-sustaining literary structure with no center and no end. Lovecraft's cosmic horror did not arrive fully formed. It emerged gradually through early stories where the vocabulary of dread was still unstable. Texts like The Tomb, 1917, Dagon, 1919, and The Nameless City, 1921, reveal a writer testing how far implication could replace explanation. These stories are narrower in scope than the later mythos, but they already contain its core logic. The past is deeper than memory, knowledge is destabilizing, and discovery leads not to mastery, but displacement. Dagon is especially instructive. The narrator survives a First World War ordeal at sea and encounters a vast, non-human presence rising from the ocean floor. The creature is barely described. What matters is the after effect. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, he admits, already anticipating disbelief. The horror functions retrospectively. The event is over, yet its meaning continues to unfold. This structure, encounter followed by obsessive aftermath, will become foundational. In The Nameless City, Lovecraft introduces another lasting mechanism, the ruin as archive. The narrator explores an ancient desert city whose architecture predates human history. Relief carvings depict a reptilian race that once ruled the earth. The revelation arrives not through action, but through interpretation. The narrator reads the walls like a text. When he realizes humanity is a latecomer, he flees. Not because of pursuit, but because of recognition. The city does nothing. It merely exists. This passive horror, grounded in antiquity, anticipates later works, like At the Mountains of Madness. We must pause here. These early stories are not yet part of a unified mythos, but they are already interoperable. Themes recur: submerged civilizations, inherited memory, knowledge that reclassifies the human species. Lovecraft begins to reuse names, locations, and books experimentally. Abdul al-Hazred appears first as a reference in The Nameless City, long before the Necronomicon is fully imagined. The text functions as a seed, not a system. This openness allows later stories to retroactively connect. Another early text, the Statement of Randolph Carter, the 1919, introduces dream logic as legitimate evidence. Carter insists that what he experienced was real, even if it occurred beyond waking perception. His insistence foreshadows the dreamland cycle and establishes a key rule. Subjective testimony is not invalid simply because it contradicts consensus reality. This destabilizes the reader's interpretive footing. If dreams can convey truth, then ordinary criteria of verification collapse. Intertext connections intensify in The Rats in the Walls, 1923. Here, Lovecraft layers personal ancestry, archaeological excavation, and linguistic regression. As the narrator descends beneath his ancestral estate, language itself degrades. He begins to chant in an unknown tongue, later revealed to be a prehistoric dialect. The horror culminates not in an external threat, but in the narrator's own voice. He becomes a conduit for buried history. This marks a shift. The past is no longer merely discovered. It speaks through the present. By the mid-1920s, Lovecraft began consciously cross-referencing his own work. Miskatonic University appears repeatedly as an institutional anchor. Arkham becomes a recurring locus. These are not conveniences. They simulate the way myths evolve, through repetition, variation, and selective memory. Each story adds a layer, but never resolves the whole. Readers are encouraged to notice patterns, to track connections, to infer continuity without confirmation. This gradual interlinking transforms isolated tales into a network. The mythos becomes a distributed structure, not a single narrative. Early appearances gain new meaning retroactively. A casual reference in one story becomes central in another. This is how Lovecraft achieves scale without exposition. The universe feels vast because it is never surveyed from above. Understanding these earliest appearances is essential. They show Lovecraft discovering, through practice, how to make horror cumulative rather than episodic. The stories do not reset, they accrete. In the next section, we will examine the first major case study where this method reaches maturity. The Call of Cthulhu, a text that does not merely tell a story, but demonstrates how fragments assemble into a worldview. The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, is not structured as a conventional narrative. It is assembled. Lovecraft presents the story as a dossier, notes, testimonies, artifacts, compiled by Francis Wayland Thurston after the death of his grand uncle. This structure matters. No single witness encounters the whole truth. Meaning emerges only through aggregation. The story's horror lies not in any one event, but in the pattern formed when fragments align. The first fragment concerns Henry Anthony Wilcox, a sculptor whose dreams compel him to carve a grotesque bas-relief. Wilcox does not understand what he is producing. His dreams are triggered by a global phenomenon, artists and sensitive individuals experiencing shared nightmares during a specific period in 1925. Lovecraft carefully timestamps these events. The dates anchor the irrational in empirical chronology. Dreams are no longer private. They become data points. This shift reframes the unconscious as a broadcast medium, vulnerable to external intrusion. The second fragment introduces Inspector Legrasse and a Louisiana cult. Here, Lovecraft deploys ethnographic distance. The cultists are described through the language of anthropology, rituals, chants, idols. The infamous chant, Fnglui Mglwunaf Cthulhu Relie Wagahnagol Ftagen, is recorded phonetically, not translated. Its meaning is deferred. This choice preserves opacity while suggesting depth. The chant functions as a linguistic fossil, evidence of a belief system older than recorded history. Importantly, the cult does not worship evil. They worship survival beyond time. We must pause here. Cthulhu himself appears only briefly and indirectly. The creature's emergence from R'lyeh is witnessed by sailors who cannot fully describe what they see. The thing cannot be described, Thurston notes. This refusal is deliberate. Lovecraft withholds visual clarity to emphasize scale. Cthulhu is not frightening because of form, but because of implication. His rising signifies the temporary alignment of cosmic conditions, not an invasion. The threat is cyclical, not imminent. Humanity survives only because the stars shift again. The final fragment, the ship's log of the alert, completes the pattern. Here, Lovecraft blends maritime adventure with cosmic indifference. The sailors do not understand what they have encountered. They flee, traumatized, unable to contextualize the event. Their ignorance does not save them. Most die anyway. Survival offers no insight, only prolonged anxiety. Thurston, assembling these accounts, reaches a grim conclusion. Humanity's ignorance is its only protection. The most merciful thing in the world, he writes, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. This sentence is the philosophical core of the story. Knowledge is not cumulative progress. It is catastrophic convergence. Thurston ends his account not with action, but with resignation. He hopes the truth remains buried. He fears what will happen when the fragments finally assemble in a single mind. The story does not close a loop, it opens one. The Call of Cthulhu demonstrates Lovecraft's mature method. Narrative becomes investigation. Horror becomes correlation. Meaning arises not from revelation, but from synthesis under constraint. The reader, like Thurston, connects the dots, and in doing so, becomes implicated. This story establishes the template for everything that follows. In the next section, we examine a later work where this template turns inward, where the archive is no longer external, but embedded in memory itself. The Shadow Out of Time, 1934-35, marks a late, refined expression of Lovecraft's core obsessions. By this point, he no longer relies on monsters or cults to generate unease. The horror lies in ontological substitution, the replacement of identity, memory, and chronology with something inhuman and vast. The story reframes consciousness as a fragile holding pattern, briefly imposed on an ancient and impersonal system. Where the Call of Cthulhu depicts fragments aligning, The Shadow Out of Time reveals that the fragments were always inside us. The protagonist, Professor Nathaniel Wingate Peaslee, suffers a mysterious mental breakdown during a lecture in 1908. For 5 years, he behaves like another person, reading obscure texts, speaking unfamiliar languages, writing in cipher. When his original personality returns, he has no memory of the intervening period. Over time, however, dreams emerge, dreams of non-human architecture, colossal archives, and disembodied perception. These visions are not metaphor. They are recovered experience, leaked through the mind's imperfect filters. What Peaslee eventually uncovers is staggering. His consciousness was displaced across time by the great race of Yith, an alien species capable of transferring minds between bodies across eons. He had inhabited one of their archivists. A Yithian mind had, in turn, inhabited him. This exchange was not supernatural. It was procedural. The Yith conduct their research by direct possession. The implication is devastating. Human subjectivity is neither protected nor unique. Minds are interchangeable across species and epochs. We must pause here. This is not a story of invasion. It is a story of inclusion without consent. The horror lies in discovering that one's life was a temporary assignment. Peaslee is not traumatized by what he saw in the past, but by what his own memories reveal about the present. The narrative device, dreams verified by archaeology, merges inner and outer evidence. When Peaslee finally finds the ruins of the Yithian city, he recognizes the chambers he visited in his sleep. His identity collapses not because it was false, but because it was more real than he imagined. Lovecraft engineers this collapse carefully. The story is filled with dates, geological eras, and taxonomic detail. These empirical anchors create a sense of credibility. Peaslee's account feels like a scientific report, not a confession. But as the narrative progresses, that sense of authority turns on itself. The more precise the details become, the more invasive they feel. The reader is forced to accept that history may contain these impossibilities, carefully buried beneath what we call time. The Yithians themselves are not malicious. They are archivists, not predators. They study, catalog, and preserve. But this neutrality is precisely what makes them horrifying. They have no interest in human consent or emotional impact. Peaslee's suffering is irrelevant to their data collection. Here, Lovecraft introduces a subtle twist: horror without intent. The universe does not conspire against us. It simply does not notice us, even as it uses us. The story's closing moments echo Lovecraft's recurring pattern. Peaslee escapes, but not really. He returns to his academic life, but his mind is permanently altered. He knows too much. He waits for the day when the Yithians will once again shift through time, when his borrowed memories might become relevant to them. It was not a dream, he writes. It had to be. the abyss of time I had crossed. The horror is not what happened. It is what cannot be undone. The shadow. Out of Time expands the mythos inward. It shows that the real threat is not external monstrosity, but intellectual exposure. The moment when a rational mind understands that its place in the universe was never secure. In the next section, we examine how Lovecraft's later collaborators attempted to domesticate this threat, transforming his cosmic ambiguity into structured theology, and in doing so, revealing both the appeal and the danger of resolution. Lovecraft died in 1937, but his mythos did not die with him. It multiplied. Letters, unpublished drafts, and a small circle of devoted correspondence ensured that his ideas remained active. Central among these was August Derleth, co-founder of Arkham House and self-appointed executor of Lovecraft's legacy. But Derleth did not merely preserve Lovecraft's work. He reshaped it, reframing an amorphous system of cosmic horror into a structured, almost theological universe. This act of reinterpretation marks the beginning of the mythos as framework, not mood. Derleth's key move was moralization. In contrast to Lovecraft's indifferent cosmos, Derleth introduced a binary structure: the elder gods as forces of good, and the great old ones as their malevolent adversaries. Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, and others were recast as rebellious figures, sealed away by a higher cosmic justice. This retcon violates the spirit of Lovecraft's fiction. As Lovecraft himself wrote in a 1933 letter, "The universe is only a dream of chaos, and man is the most accidental of blunders." For Lovecraft, there were no sides, only scale. Derleth introduced cosmic intention, where there had been only entropy. This reveals something larger. Readers often seek systems. Lovecraft's fragmented, anti-anthropocentric horror posed a psychological challenge. Derleth offered structure, taxonomies, alignments, timelines. In stories like The Lurker at the Threshold, 1945, co-authored posthumously with Lovecraft, we find familiar mythos elements reshuffled into recognizable tropes. The unknowable becomes cataloged, ritual becomes functional, the mythos becomes a pantheon with distinct powers and agendas. This shift renders Lovecraftian horror more accessible, but less destabilizing. Other collaborators expanded the mythos in different directions. Clark Ashton Smith, for instance, embraced the decadence and dark beauty of Lovecraft's world, but infused it with ironic detachment and ornate language. Smith's contributions often focused less on cosmic dread and more on existential ruin. Robert E. Howard, creator of Conan, borrowed mythos terms for his prehistoric settings, blending pulp adventure with hints of ancient terror. Their work widened the mythos's tonal range, making it more adaptable, but also more diffuse. Later writers like Ramsey Campbell, T.E.D. Klein, and Caitlin R. Kiernan approached the mythos with a return to psychological unease. Rather than expanding the taxonomy of gods, they explored the effects of Lovecraftian knowledge on place, identity, and perception. Klein's The Events at Poroth Farm, 1972, reimagines the epistemic threat as something deeply personal, a virus of attention. Kiernan's fragmented postmodern stories dissolve boundaries between myth and memory, suggesting that the mythos is no longer external. It has entered the reader's interpretive habits. We must pause here. The mythos is not a canon. It is a recurrent structure, a framework for exploring the failure of human-centered narratives. Its adaptability is its strength, but also its risk. Derleth's moral overlay demonstrates how easily the mythos can become decorative. A list of names, a glossary of monsters, a style without substance. The challenge for later writers is to restore the original function, not just to reference Lovecraft, but to reenact his unsettling epistemology. Today, the mythos exists across forms: novels, games, film, music, but its origin lies in instability. Lovecraft did not offer a system to be followed. He offered a model of collapse. As we move next to Part 4, we will explore how this unstable inheritance escaped the page, how mythos elements bled into urban legend, conspiracy, academic theory, and artistic subculture. The mythos, once fictive, now circulates as something nearly believed. Lovecraft wrote fiction, but over time, fragments of his invented world began to circulate as if they were not fiction at all. The Necronomicon, the most infamous of his creations, is a prime example. Despite Lovecraft's own letters clarifying its invention, bookstores began selling versions in the 1970s, claiming to be translations of Abdul Alhazred's original work. Some editions even included faux histories, publication dates, and false academic commentary. What began as literary invention became a cultural artifact, a book no one had written, but many believed existed. This transformation was not accidental. It reveals how myth can escape its source. Lovecraft seeded his stories with pseudo-documentary signals, obscure citations, footnotes, newspaper clippings. These rhetorical devices gave his fiction the feel of research, not storytelling. Once released into the cultural bloodstream, these elements behaved like urban legend, uncertain, authorless, contagious. Like any good myth, they invited repetition and mutation. The Necronomicon became a found object, passed between occultists, pranksters, and conspiracy theorists alike. Reports of real Cthulhu cults have surfaced periodically, especially in online forums and fringe spiritual spaces. Some are tongue-in-cheek, others more earnest. The Church of the Subgenius, a satirical religious movement from the 1980s, borrowed from Lovecraft's mythos to parody doomsday cults. ARGs, alternate reality games, have incorporated references to Nyarlathotep or deep-sea expeditions uncovering strange glyphs. TikTok users now stage eldritch sightings with manipulated audio and distorted imagery. These performances are not merely jokes. They play with belief thresholds, inviting viewers to ask, what if? We must pause here. What drives this recurring impulse to treat fiction as evidence? Part of the answer lies in the design of Lovecraft's universe. His monsters rarely appear. His truths are always fragmented. The stories mimic real experience, partial, suggestive, unresolved. This incompleteness creates interpretive energy. Readers and viewers become participants, piecing together clues, extending the story beyond its bounds. In this way, the mythos behaves like living folklore, not fixed, but transmitted. Digital culture amplifies this effect. The fragmented, recursive structure of Lovecraftian horror mirrors the logic of the internet. Hyperlinks without hierarchy, data without guarantee of truth. Creepypasta stories borrow Lovecraft's tone, dry, bureaucratic, strangely detailed. Wikis catalog mythos, creatures with false citations. Some YouTube creators use ASMR horror formats to simulate forbidden broadcasts or dream logs. The mythos has been absorbed into the grammar of digital myth-making, short form, decentralized, eerily plausible. This absorption points to something larger. In a secular, information-saturated world, people still seek the hidden, not to explain it, but to inhabit its ambiguity. Lovecraft's mythos offers a kind of metaphysical space, not belief in the supernatural, but fascination with the preposterous. It satisfies the same curiosity as UFO sightings, cryptids, or haunted ruins. These are not expressions of literal belief. They are acts of participation in a world where reality feels insufficient. Lovecraft's fiction now occupies a liminal zone. It is not quite truth, not quite fiction. It is folklore for a culture that mistrusts both science and religion, but still craves the aura of significance. The mythos survives because it offers a way to simulate awe. And awe, in a disenchanted age, is hard to come by. This ongoing blurring between fiction and fact leads us to the next layer of transmission. Not hoax, but adaptation. In the next section, we explore how Lovecraft's symbols and structures have migrated into film, music, and games. Mediums where audience participation is not optional, but required. Lovecraft's stories are notoriously difficult to adapt. His horror is not visual, but structural. The most terrifying moments in his fiction occur not when a monster appears, but when a character understands something irreversible. That shift, from not knowing to knowing too much, doesn't translate easily to spectacle. And yet, Lovecraft's influence across modern media is immense. What survives is not the plot, but the logic of incompleteness, of epistemic collapse, of reality turning against its observer. In film, direct adaptations often falter. Attempts like The Dunwich Horror, 1970, or Dagon, 2001, retain mythos names but lose the psychological depth. More successful are spiritual adaptations. John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982, captures Lovecraft's paranoia perfectly, an alien intelligence that mimics organic life, erasing trust, identity, and even form. Similarly, Event Horizon, 1997, merges cosmic nihilism with sci-fi aesthetics. A spaceship becomes a gate to another dimension, not of evil, but of incomprehensible sensation. These films do not quote Lovecraft. They inherit his structure of dread. Games have proven a more natural vessel. Tabletop RPGs like Call of Cthulhu, 1981, invert the typical heroic model. Players are scholars and detectives, not warriors. Survival is unlikely. Sanity, more so. The horror unfolds not through combat, but through accumulating knowledge. Modern video games continue this thread. Bloodborne, 2015, while inspired by Gothic horror, descends into Lovecraftian territory in its second half. The player uncovers a hidden cosmic order, ancient beings called the Great Ones, and a city infected by insight. The more you understand, the more disturbing the world becomes. Madness is not failure, it's progress. Music channels the mythos in more abstract ways. Metal, ambient, and dark wave genres draw on Lovecraft's imagery. Cyclopean ruins, tentacled deities, impossible stars, not for narrative, but for atmosphere. Bands like Metallica, The Call of Cthulhu, Electric Wizard, and Nile incorporate mythos themes into their lyrics and sound design. These aren't concept albums about Cthulhu. They're invocations, rituals of mood. Noise, dissonance, and repetition simulate cosmic scale, often suggesting vastness rather than declaring it. We must pause here. Across these media, Lovecraft's content is often stripped down or recontextualized. Names change, creatures merge. But what remains is the structure of unknowing. Discovery as danger, knowledge as infection, reality as unstable. These adaptations are not homages. They are translations of affect, of structure, of philosophical unease. Why does this logic persist across genres? One answer lies in interactivity. Games and immersive media allow users to experience disorientation directly. In Amnesia, The Dark Descent, 2010, the player's sanity depletes when looking at certain entities. The optimal strategy is not to fight, but to avoid perceiving. This inversion of typical gameplay, where looking becomes a liability, echoes Lovecraft's core idea. Some things are not meant to be understood, and trying to understand them is how you fall. The persistence of Lovecraft's structures in media points to a deeper need. In a time saturated with information, audiences are drawn to works that challenge interpretation itself. Lovecraftian. Horror thrives in this space, not by revealing secrets, but by denying the possibility of resolution. Film, games, and music become laboratories where this perceptual instability is enacted, not explained. From here, we move into cultural interpretation. Lovecraft's horror no longer belongs only to literature or adaptation. It has been adopted by academics, occultists, and subcultures seeking meaning through destabilization. In the next section, we examine how his influence has been appropriated not just aesthetically, but intellectually. Lovecraft's mythos has migrated well beyond fiction. It now circulates in academic theory, occult practice, internet subcultures, and visual art, not merely as content, but as method. His ideas have become frameworks for thinking about instability, scale, and the limits of reason. What began as pulp horror has become a conceptual toolkit. And this evolution tells us something important. Lovecraft's worldview is not just remembered, it is used. In academic philosophy, scholars like Eugene Thacker, Graham Harman, and Reza Negarestani have drawn directly from Lovecraftian logic. Thacker's In the Dust of This Planet, 2011, examines what he calls horror of philosophy, the realization that human thought is structurally incapable of grasping the real. Lovecraft's cosmos, for Thacker, is not just indifferent, it is non-correlational, existing entirely outside the human mind's ability to map it. Similarly, Harman's object-oriented ontology echoes Lovecraft's refusal to center human perception. The mythos is not metaphor, it is metaphysics. Occult subcultures have also appropriated the mythos, often blurring the line between parody and practice. The so-called Cthulhu cults of the 1980s and 90s, like the esoteric order of Dagon, were often tongue-in-cheek, yet some adopted serious ritual elements. Kenneth Grant, a disciple of Aleister Crowley, incorporated Lovecraftian entities into his Typhonian magical system. Grant claimed that Lovecraft was a kind of unconscious prophet, channeling truths he could not consciously comprehend. Whether taken seriously or not, this interpretation reframes Lovecraft not as a fiction writer, but as a dream channeler of forgotten forces. In online subcultures, Lovecraftian themes persist as aesthetic modes. Eldritch core, cosmic horror TikTok, and visual meme formats all deploy mythos language, tentacles, glyphs, madness, as shorthand for psychological dislocation. But these references are rarely narrative. They're effective. A meme that says, "He sees the angles that should not be seen," isn't telling a story. It's signaling a mood of confusion, of obsession, of quiet, irreparable exposure. This use of Lovecraft's language as ambient expression reveals how deeply the mythos has sunk into our cultural unconscious. Visual artists, especially those working in surrealism, sculpture, and concept design, frequently draw from Lovecraft without overt citation. H.R. Geiger's alien designs owe much to Lovecraft's aesthetics, the fusion of organic and mechanical, the sense of form without purpose. Contemporary artists like Zdzisław Beksinski or the video artist David Firth adopt similar strategies. Bodies that bleed into space, structures that defy geometry, environments that feel both ancient and post-human. These are not illustrations of mythos creatures. They are visualizations of collapse. We must pause here. None of these appropriations are faithful in the traditional sense. They rework, misread, exaggerate. But this is how myths behave. They resist ownership. They persist by adaptation. The mythos is not a closed system. It is a set of impulses toward unknowability, toward scale, toward the breakdown of sense. And those impulses are culturally portable. What these appropriations reveal is a broader psychological shift. Lovecraft's vision is attractive not because it offers clarity, but because it offers a different way to think about uncertainty. In a world saturated with data, where institutions falter and epistemologies blur, the mythos provides a strangely coherent metaphor for disorientation. It says, "You were never the center. You were never meant to know. But you are free to witness." This shift prepares us for the final section. Beyond art, subculture, or ritual, Lovecraft's legacy endures in how we think, or fail to think, about our place in the cosmos. We now turn to the lasting psychological and philosophical implications of his vision, what it does not just to our culture, but to consciousness itself. Lovecraft's horror endures not because of its imagery, but because of what it implies about consciousness. His stories suggest that our minds are not designed to grasp the world, but to ignore most of it. The real fear is not that something terrible exists beyond the stars. The fear is that something incomprehensible has always been there, and we were never meant to notice. His legacy, then, is not just literary, it is epistemological. It changes how we think about knowing itself. Psychologically, Lovecraft challenges the illusion of stability. His protagonists rarely die. They survive, aware. That awareness is the true trauma. After exposure, ordinary life becomes intolerable. As the narrator of The Shadow Out of Time admits, even the skies of spring and the flowers of summer must ever afterward be poison to me. Horror lingers not in the event, but in the altered perception that follows. Lovecraft's characters are not haunted by monsters. They are haunted by new frameworks of reality that cannot be unlearned. Philosophically, this is a break from previous horror traditions. Gothic literature often centers guilt, repression, or moral violation. Lovecraft offers no such structure. There is no transgression, only contact. The horror does not punish, it reclassifies. You are not a sinner, you are a data point. In this way, Lovecraft anticipates a posthuman perspective. His mythos strips away the centrality of human will, morality, and agency. What remains is not chaos, but system without concern. We must pause here. This reframing is not entirely bleak. In removing the human from the center, Lovecraft also removes the weight of divine judgment. There is no cosmic cruelty, because there is no cosmic interest at all. Some find this liberating, others find it unbearable. The mythos does not answer the question, what are we? It dissolves the question entirely. The self is not confirmed, it is destabilized. And in that destabilization, a new kind of clarity emerges. Contemporary philosophy has absorbed this logic. Thinkers in speculative realism, object-oriented ontology, and nihilist metaphysics echo Lovecraft's core themes: scale, indifference, unknowability. Not coincidentally, many of these theorists cite him directly. He offers a model of thought untethered from human priority. In Thacker's terms, Lovecraft writes about the world without us, a world that continues regardless of our presence, our theories, or our hopes. Why does this matter now? Because Lovecraft's horror articulates something that modern life increasingly confirms. Climate change, AI, pandemics, and geopolitical complexity confront us with systems beyond any one mind's control. We are surrounded by feedback loops we cannot fully perceive. Lovecraft's fiction becomes a kind of rehearsal, not for monsters, but for cognitive limits. It dramatizes what it feels like to see too much, too clearly, too late. And yet, people return to these stories. They quote the forbidden names, trace the mad maps, read the fake books. This suggests something deeper than fear. It suggests appetite, not for gore, but for scale, not for evil, but for displacement. Lovecraft's vision persists because it satisfies a darker curiosity, the desire to unthink the human. We end then, not with resolution, but with continuation. The mythos was never closed. Its implications are still unfolding, in thought, in culture, in the ways we imagine our minds breaking against the shape of things we were not meant to see. The final horror is not the thing itself. It is the recognition that we asked to see it,